Once upon a time, in a remote village surrounded by dense, dark woods, there lived a young man named Daniel. The village was small, with cobblestone streets, weathered houses, and the ever-present sound of rustling leaves from the forest beyond. The villagers were friendly enough, but there was one rule they all lived by: never go near the old house at the edge of the forest. The house was ancient, its walls cracked and covered in ivy. Its windows were dark, like empty eyes watching anyone who dared pass by. Whispers floated through the village about the house, stories of strange noises at night, of lights flickering in the windows when no one was there, and of people who had wandered too close and were never seen again. Daniel had grown up hearing these stories. He had walked past the house countless times, but he had never dared to get close. Fear controlled him, not just about the house, but about life itself. He was afraid to take risks, afraid to speak his mind, afraid to fail. And so he lived cautiously, always staying within the safe boundaries of the village, never stepping into the unknown. But one cold autumn evening, Daniel's life changed forever. A young girl from the village, Emily, had gone missing. She was last seen playing near the forest's edge, chasing her dog, who had run toward the old house. The village was in a panic. A search party was formed, but no one was brave enough to go near the house. Everyone stood at the edge of the woods, calling her name, but no one moved toward the house. Daniel stood among them, his heart racing. He heard Emily's faint cries for help drifting through the crisp evening air. His fists tightened. He turned toward the house and saw the fear in everyone's eyes. But then he thought of Emily, scared and alone. His fear screamed at him to stay put, to let someone else go, but no one else was going. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward. "I'm going in." The village elder grabbed his arm. "Daniel, no, it's dangerous. You don't know what's in there." Daniel swallowed hard, his heart thudding painfully in his chest. "I know, but she's in there." And then he walked toward the house. As he approached, the air grew colder. The trees seemed to lean toward him, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The house loomed in front of him, larger than it had ever seemed before. His hand trembled as he pushed the creaking gate open. The house smelled of damp wood and decay. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling beams, and dust floated through the dim light that filtered through the cracked windows. The floorboards groaned beneath his feet. A cold draft wrapped around his neck, and the sound of distant whispers seemed to drift through the air. "Emily?" he called out. His voice echoed down the dark hallway. A faint sound, a cry, came from upstairs. His chest tightened. He took a shaky breath and forced himself up the narrow staircase, each step groaning beneath his weight. At the top of the stairs was a long hallway lined with closed doors. One of them was slightly ajar. Daniel pushed the door open slowly. Inside the room, Emily sat huddled in the corner, clutching her dog and sobbing. Her eyes widened when she saw Daniel. "Daniel!" she cried. Relief surged through him, but just as he stepped toward her, the door behind him slammed shut. A chill swept through the room. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and flicker unnaturally. Daniel's breath quickened. His pulse hammered in his ears. He grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her close. "It's okay. We're going to get out of here." But as he turned toward the door, the shadows moved. A low, whispering voice curled through the air. "Stay. You belong here now." Daniel froze, his muscles locked. The darkness pressed in, thick and heavy. The whispers grew louder, swirling through his mind. "You'll never escape. You'll fail. You're not strong enough." He squeezed his eyes shut. His legs felt heavy. Fear wrapped around him like chains. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. And then Emily squeezed his hand. "Daniel, please." His eyes snapped open. He looked at her tears streaming down her face, and something shifted inside him. "No," he said aloud. "I'm not afraid of you." The whispers sharpened into a piercing hiss. The shadows lunged. Daniel pulled Emily into his arms and charged toward the door. He kicked it open, and a cold wind howled through the house. The shadows lashed out, but Daniel ran. Down the stairs, through the front door, into the forest. He didn't stop running until they were back in the village square. The villagers rushed to them, cheering and crying. Emily's mother hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Daniel stood, his chest heaving. He glanced toward the forest. The house was barely visible through the trees. The windows were dark again. The village elder approached him. "How did you—" Daniel shook his head. "I stopped letting fear control me." From that day on, Daniel was a different man. He no longer let fear dictate his life. He took chances, spoke his mind, and chased his dreams. He realized that fear was not the enemy. It was the barrier between the life he was living and the life he could have. And he knew now that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about moving forward despite the fear. Years later, Daniel stood at the edge of the village with Emily, now grown. She smiled up at him. "Thank you for saving me that night." Daniel smiled. "You saved me too." And as they walked back toward the village, Daniel knew one truth deep in his heart. Fear only has power when you let it stop you.